This happened to my girlfriend one rainy night. It was Friday, and so she was returning home late on the last train. It was already past 1 a.m. by the time she arrived at her station, and the street in front of the station was crowded with people rushing home. On this particular day, it was raining heavily, and numerous people popped their umbrellas by the ticket gate, annoyed. My girlfriend was one of them, and she opened her umbrella, wanting to get home quickly. She lived in an apartment at the top of the hill, about a 15-minute walk from the station. As she got close to home, others around her disappeared. Alone, she walked up the steep, nameless hill, but then, about halfway up, she suddenly stopped. Her breathing rough, she calmed herself and looked at the top of the hill. A woman in her 30s, wearing a blue raincoat, stood there. A small umbrella hung from her left elbow, and she appeared to be waiting for someone. My girlfriend continued walking, unbothered by the sight. But then, she heard the sound of footsteps coming from behind her. They initially sounded far away, so she paid close attention. As the footsteps got closer, her suspicions grew. It was late, so she readied herself. She realized that the footsteps weren't just coming from behind her, but they appeared to be matching her own. She grew frightened and quickly started walking towards the woman in the raincoat. Then she plucked up all her courage and turned around. But nobody was there. She heard the footsteps so clearly, but all she could see before her was the bottom of the hill. But strangely, the sound of the footsteps continued to get closer. The sound seemed to pass right through her and then keep going. A cold air blew through her and then disappeared. Her mind went blank at such an unbelievable event, and cold sweat ran down her spine. Then she listened closer, as though following the footsteps. The sound disappeared before the woman in the raincoat. The woman in the raincoat smiled, opened the small umbrella that dangled from her left arm, and handed it to someone. How strange. Nobody was there. A boy of 4 or 5, wearing a uniform from the local kindergarten, stood in the once empty spot in front of the woman. That's right. The person following her from behind was the boy. And that woman in the raincoat was waiting for him. My girlfriend stood there, taking in the unbelievable sight before her eyes. She'd only just turned around. "Mama, today I ate a carrot." "Is that so? Good for you." "Yeah, and then..." "Look, the rain is getting heavier, so we should hurry home." "Okay." Then the pair walked off towards the other side of the road and disappeared. Flustered, My girlfriend stood on the spot for a while, unable to move. Immediately after that, she heard what sounded like a large accident. She screamed and ran as fast as she could. She arrived home and started to calm down. She realized that the mother and child were ghosts and unable to move on. That night, with both sadness and fear gripping her heart, she cried the whole night through. I stayed by her side, but could say nothing. Did she really see the ghost of a mother and child? Or just an illusion in the rain? Ever since then, my girlfriend refuses to leave the house when it rains and cries throughout the night for no reason. What should I do about it? Science room. The science room. The creepiest place in the entire school. The stench of medicinal items fills the entire room, and numerous snakes and lizards in formalin line the shelves. A model skeleton stands in the corner of the preparation room. It's a terrible place where it's rare not to have some scary story told about it. In one junior high school in Kanagawa Prefecture, they say you will hear the sound of a frog's cries when cleaning the science room during winter. Finding it strange to hear a frog during the middle of winter, you look around and there is a single frog in a jar of formalin that has a better shine to it than all the rest. Once you find that frog, its head will spring around and begin croaking. In one elementary school in Hiroshima, you can hear something clattering as night falls, like someone is walking around. Even the teachers talk about it. One day, a student teacher who was on duty heard these footsteps. Following the sound brought them to the science room in the basement. Nervously, they opened the door and turned on the lights. The model skeleton was standing there, holding a lamp. And in this school as well, one story has been terrifying children for many years. Over 20 years ago, there was a teacher in charge of science. During that teacher's classes, all they did was dissect frogs or carp, each time taking a scalpel in hand. One day, something different to the usual was laid atop the lab tables. The shape of it was different to everyone else's. "What's this?" one student wondered and asked the teacher. The teacher grinned and said, "It's a person." After that, spirits of the small animals that had been dissected in the room began to appear. And, on the rarest of occasions, you could see the spirit of the dissected human. The malice of those who died here no doubt continues to linger, even now. Perhaps If you take a photo, then you might see something. Line up the camera with somewhere you feel is suspicious and press the shutter button. Looks like the rumors were true. If it had just been frogs and carp being dissected, then it would be believable. But to actually dissect a human as well. It probably won't end with the spirit just appearing in photos. I think we should get out of here. Quickly. The rain fell gently that night. They say that supernatural phenomena are much more common on nights like these. Apparently, a certain amount of dampness is somehow related to the appearance of spirits. Nanao hated rainy days. Whenever she experienced something strange, it was always on a rainy day, or days when dampness hung in the air. Nanao was at home in her apartment, waiting for the wedding ceremony the following day. The rain that had started just earlier fell against her window. It wasn't very heavy. She suddenly worried about the weather for the next day, and opening the door, something made her want to go down the hall. When she entered, she could see the shape of a person standing at the end. Nanao was nearsighted, so she couldn't see things in the distance very well. Regardless, she clearly saw the outline of a figure bathed in light. No way. Why? I didn't think I'd see it again. There was no denying that it was supernatural. The figure was black, like a shadow, and yet she could see through it. Why is this happening now all of a sudden? Ah, that's right. The rain. Because it's raining. Nanao remembered back to her school days. She was in junior high. The sound of the never-ending rain drew her attention, and despite being unable to sleep, Nanao closed her eyes and tried to force it. Then, something pulled on her leg. She tried to fight it off, but she couldn't. She was paralyzed. Then something heavy climbed on top of her, and a sad, pained voice whispered something by her ear. Nanao's head felt like it was going to split with pain, and she prayed for this nightmare to quickly end. A short while later, the pain passed, and at the same time the weight on her lifted, and the paralysis passed. A few days later, she was going to be leaving for her second grade school camp, and after school that day, she played kokuri-san with her friends, which was all the rage at the time. They asked all sorts of nonsense, what you might expect of junior high students. But then the coin suddenly started to move of its own accord, even though nobody had asked anything. Risako is lonely. Eh? Risako? Aokigahara. Aokigahara was close to where they were going on their school camp. Who's Risako? On their way to camp a few days later, Nanao whispered the name Risako inside, over and over. The bus arrived at their cabin in the rain. Nanao immediately made her way to the baths with her friends, but suddenly she felt ill, so she quickly washed and returned to the room before everyone else. When she opened the door, something was inside. It was a woman with long hair, wearing a blue dress. She gulped, and the woman slowly turned towards her before speaking very clearly. Risako is lonely. Seized by both fear and shock, Nanao fled down the hall. She didn't think she'd be able to tell anyone about it. The next day they went outdoors to study. Unable to get the previous day out of her mind, Nanao drifted listlessly through the day until her friend Mummy came running up to her, pale-faced. Mummy was another of the girls who had been in the classroom that day. "Hey, Nanao, listen. I just saw something strange in the trees. There was a woman with long hair in a blue dress, and when I looked at her, she disappeared." Nanao was shocked, and then she told Mummy all about what she'd seen herself. Mummy listened to her story and then burst into tears. She was so scared. On the last day of camp, Nanao and her friends went to visit the Wind Cave in Aokigahara for a field trip. But considering what had happened, neither Nanao nor Mummy wanted to go. As soon as she stepped into the cave, Nanao felt like somebody was watching her, and she couldn't stop shaking. She tried to tell herself that it was just her imagination, and kept walking, when suddenly a cold hand gripped her ankle. Nanao screamed without thinking, but she wasn't the only one. Mummy also screamed at the same time, having experienced the exact same thing. They grabbed each other and walked the rest of the way huddled close together. They must have looked strange to anyone who saw them. But that was all they could do. They couldn't do anything else. No, it was the fear that was forcing them to be like that. Although they didn't want to, the pair made their way deep into the wind cave inside Aokigahara. That rainy day. On the way back home, they realized that playing Kokuri-san that day was a mistake, and came to regret it. The pair stared at the rain on the windows. On the long road home, all they could do was pray that Risako would finally move on. And ever since that day, whenever it rained, the fear crept back into Nanao's head again, along with Risako's voice. Risako is lonely. I was still an elementary school student at the time. During the summer vacation, my family went on a trip to Izu Shimoda. We stayed in a regular hotel facing the coast. Our room was on the 6th floor, the front being a Western room and the back a Japanese room. A sliding screen separated the Japanese room from the window outside. It was a nicer room than I expected, and the room was wide enough for the 4 of us to sleep in the same space. I remember the view of the ocean from the window being especially beautiful. Ayumi-chan, you're okay with this room, aren't you? Yeah, here seems okay. My mother whispered to me with a dull look on her face as soon as we arrived. I was a pretty nervous kid at the time. If I got a chill on the back of my neck when going somewhere, then I most definitely wouldn't stay there. It always ended up causing my family even more trouble, but I couldn't ignore it. But this was our first family trip in a while, so I let my mother's words go. That night, everyone fell asleep as soon as we'd finished dinner, perhaps exhausted from the trip there. I slept closest to the ocean, followed by my father, younger brother, and then mother. I thought I'd fall asleep instantly. But strangely, as I waited, I didn't feel tired. Before I knew it, it was midnight, and silence filled the room. Why can't I sleep? I shifted in my bed and placed my back to the sliding doors. As I did, a horrible chill ran down my spine. I can't hear the sound of the waves. I felt it in my bones. In the back of my neck, I could sense something on the other side of the sliding doors. I can't turn around, I thought. If I did, then a fear of something more dead than alive waited for me. Mama! Mama! Wake up! Wake up! What is it? You need the toilet? I woke my mother up, who was sleeping farthest from the sliding doors. Change places with me. There's something strange there. I'm scared. She considered my words for a moment, annoyed, before changing places with me. After that, I was able to safely fall asleep. My mother, on the other hand, seemed to sleep with her back to me, with her face facing the sliding doors. What's that? A voice? We're on the 6th floor. What the hell was that? I'm not going over there. Disappear! According to my mother, a man, woman, and even a baby covered in injuries stood on the other side of the sliding door, looking at us bitterly. These people that looked like corpses grabbed her hair and tried to pull her through to the other side of the sliding door. She apparently screamed so that they wouldn't drag her through. This only took place over several seconds, although it felt much longer. She struggled with them and shook the hand off. Then, the corpses on the other side of the sliding doors disappeared. Before long, she realized that the dark beach was silent. In the end, both of us were so creeped out that we quickly packed our bags. I felt bad for my father and brother, but for us, it was no place to be having a family vacation. After that night, whenever we visited the beach, our mother would always ask us, "Can you hear the waves?" She must have been terrified. These days, she acts rather cold towards me. Report. The Sugatami well inside Chomeiji Temple in Nerima Ward. Legend has it that this strange well can alert people to their time of death. When you look inside the well, if you happen to see your blurry face reflected in the water, it means that your time of death is near. Actually looking into the well reveals it to be quite deep, and the surface of the water is dark, so seeing your face clearly is quite difficult. Even if we assume that this is just a legend, it's still not a very nice place. If this happens, you can visit Chomeiji Temple to avoid misfortune. In the past, a priest of Chomeiji Temple was attacked by thieves, and there's a statue of Enma that takes his place. If you visit the temple, it's said that statue will take on all of your misfortune. Access. By car. On Tokyo Metropolitan Road Section 8, heading towards Sedagaya, go past the Seibu line, and it's roughly 80 meters from the second left. On foot, roughly 7 meters from Shakuji Park Station on the Seibu Ikebukuro line. Point. Fear, 1 flame. Atmosphere, 2 flames. Sidings, 1 flame. Chance of being cursed, 1 flame. Total, 1 flame. This well, in the corner of Chomeiji Temple's outskirts, is also called the Star Well. Lots of strange things have happened to me ever since I was a kid. I'd like you to listen to just one of those chilling tales that actually happened to me. It all happened just recently. It started not long after I entered high school. At first, it was just a small thing that took place during music class. Class was about to end when something strange happened. Suddenly, The piano made a sound. The teacher was in the prep room looking for a record. And it wasn't one of the students either. That's right. Nobody was there. After hearing that sound, chills ran through my body. The sound began to cause quite a stir in the classroom. But the teacher seemed to think that it was nothing more than a prank. And, just like that, class ended. After class, I stayed behind in the room with my close friend Wakako to chat for a while. But I didn't say a thing about the chills I'd just felt. "Hey, you two! Hurry up and get out! I can't lock the room with you in there, seriously!" Takai-san, one of the more uptight girls from our class, yelled at us. Wakako seemed offended, but we were the ones sitting in the room after class with no reason. So we could understand where Takai-san was coming from. I didn't feel very well, so I calmed Wakako down and we left the room. "What is with her? She doesn't have to be so rude." "It's over now. I mean, she should choose her words more carefully." That was our last class for the day, so Wakako continued complaining the whole way home. I just looked up at the sky the whole time. Then, that night, I was sleeping in my room when suddenly I woke up, struggling to breathe. It was like somebody was pushing down on my chest. Wondering who it could be, I looked down and was shocked. There was what looked like a woman's arm. It was nothing more than a woman's left arm, pushing down hard on my chest. But that wasn't all. A black shadow appeared from beneath my bed and floated above my head. It was a severed head. It looked down at me, smiling and floating in the air. Then, the pressure on my chest grew even stronger, and I sank into the bed. I tried to call out for help, but then I passed out. The next day, I trembled with fear once more. A dark bruise clearly stood out on my chest and neck. I thought it had just been a dream. I grew so scared that the moment I stepped into the bathroom and saw my mother, I burst into tears. I told her everything that had happened until that point. She listened to my story, apparently not believing a word I said. But she refused to directly look at my body. She called school and let them know I would be absent, and took me to see a spirit medium she knew. According to the medium, I'd been possessed by a spirit. Not just any spirit, but a particularly dangerous one. Apparently, it was the spirit of a young woman, the same age as me, who had been killed and then cut into pieces. I quickly remembered the severed head from the night before. But the spirit medium said that my guardian spirit was incredibly strong, so there was nothing for me to worry about. My mother didn't agree with his line of thinking. Even if my guardian spirit was strong, my body was still bruised. She forced the medium to perform an exorcism before we could go home. That night. Ah! Something slapped my cheek in the middle of the night, waking me up. Somebody was standing in front of me. It was that woman, the severed head. Only this time, she had both her feet and limbs with her. Your right arm? As I said that, she started pressing her hand down on my chest. Stop! She said to me. It was as though she was trying to intimidate me, her face getting closer as she pushed down hard on my chest. Takai-san! I thought that if I didn't say something, she'd take my arm, so I suddenly screamed out Takai-san's name. Then she grinned and disappeared. That's as much as I remember, and next thing I knew, it was morning. After that, several days passed uneventfully. But then one day, a terrible accident took place at school. While cleaning, Takai-san fell over the second-floor balcony and had to be taken to the hospital in an ambulance. Her right arm had broken at the shoulder joint, and she'd lost consciousness. It's my fault. I thought it happened because I said Takai-san's name that night. Then I suddenly felt woozy and passed out. I was so shocked that I spent the next week in bed. When I thought of Takai-san, I couldn't sleep at night. The only thing that saved me was when Wakako and the others came around to tell me about Takai-san. She was in the hospital, but she was otherwise okay. It was like a weight lifted off my shoulders. But my relief was short-lived, and I listened as Wakako told me about the rumors going around school. I grew even more despondent. The rumors spoke of what happened in the music room that time. Apparently, the music room had long been a topic amongst our seniors and teachers. People whispered that it might have been related to a murder that took place there 10 years earlier. In that accident, a female student was murdered and her body cut up and left abandoned for a week. Intensive investigations went nowhere, and they never found her right arm. After that, rumors spread of a right arm wandering around the school. Unexpectedly, Wakako laughed it off as a story someone had made up and then spread. But to me, it didn't sound very fake. After that, the spirit medium I visited told me to pray for the girl. I've been doing that each and every day. Thanks to that, nothing has happened to me since. Perhaps next time, Takai-san will be her target. I'm very worried. I'm in no position to say anything, but I'm really worried. I pray she gets out of the hospital soon. Takai-san, I'm so sorry. This happened when my friend went to Izu for a school trip. For 2 days, they travelled around famous sightseeing spots in Izu. On the 3rd day, they went to the beach for some free time to enjoy as they saw fit. Beach umbrellas lined the shore, and students played all over. The sunlight was strong during lunch, and afterwards, my friend got out of the water to relax on the sand. Then, he noticed someone drowning near a buoy about 15 meters from the shoreline. Hey! Over there! Someone's drowning! He screamed to his friends nearby. Idiot! Huh? That's Iwazaki the merman. He's just messing with you. It was Iwazaki-kun, a student who excelled at swimming, often taking 1st or 2nd place. He'd managed to fool my friend. While treading water, Iwazaki-kun waved him 2 peace signs with his hands up in the air. His earlier screams echoed vainly in his heart. Damn it, he got me. There's no way he'd drown. He's just trying to get some attention. Shall we take a photo? Yeah, let's go. One of his friends had a camera with him. My friend borrowed it and took a photo of Iwazaki-kun, right as he flailed about, drowning. Haha, he's doing it again. What an idiot. Doesn't he get tired? Hey, I took the photo, so you can have it back now. Huh? Suddenly, Iwazaki-kun, who had just been playing around, disappeared into the water. At first, they all thought that he was just messing with them again. But then, several minutes passed, and there was still no sign of him. The group of friends, sensing danger, ran towards the water. Iwazaki! That night, they found Iwazaki-kun's dead body. The school decided to end the trip early, and on the 4th day, everyone returned to school. For the students, the death left a sour taste in their mouths, like a most unwanted souvenir of their school trip. But how could someone who was so good at swimming suddenly drown in just a few seconds like that? How could he die in such shallow water that was only 2 meters deep? The incident left them with more questions than answers. The photo they took of him, ironically, ended up being the last photo of him alive. My friend prayed for him to rest in peace. One week later, they discovered the cause of Iwazaki-kun's drowning. Thanks to one ghost photo. So it had been. Perhaps something lurked in the water or the mountains. Either way, it sucked for the last photo of him ever to turn out to be a ghost photo. Next time you go swimming at the beach, make sure you take the utmost care. For certain reasons, I'm currently living away from my mother and with my grandmother and aunt. We live in a 2-story house. But perhaps because it's an all-female household, things feel kinda lonely, and we only use the first floor. This happened when I started junior high, and we used the second floor for storage. I got home from school, and something about the second floor scared me, so from that day on, I was unable to go up there. Even I didn't know the reason why. All I knew was that the air up there was different, and something about it gave me the chills. And even now, I strongly remember the feeling of fear it inspired in me. Then, almost every day, strange things started happening. Before I knew it, I was standing in the front doorway, wondering why these things kept happening. I started to think, "Oh, Chiyoko, what are you doing over there?" My grandmother called out to me. I'd been so focused on the second floor that I suddenly jumped. She followed that up with a request to join her on the second floor to look for something. When they talk about bad timing, this is exactly the type of situation they mean. I was terrified, but clinging to my grandmother like she was my last hope, I followed her up to the second floor. When we got there, the room stank of dust and was packed with junk, a strange light shining through the window from the setting sun. But other than that, there was nothing strange about the room. It was a regular storage room. It seemed I'd been thinking about it a little too much. I didn't go up to the second floor very much, so I'd probably created my own scary world up there. I started looking for the thing my grandmother was after. I started with the old chest of drawers nearby. I checked the first, second, and then third drawers in order. But there was nothing inside. When I opened the fourth drawer, I found a single page from an old daily calendar. January 20th, 1989. That was the day my grandfather died. I felt like I'd seen something awful that I shouldn't have. I quickly closed the drawer. I stepped back from the chest of drawers and looked away. Then a mirror jumped into my field of vision. Tempted by it, I walked over and pulled the cloth covering it off. A strange woman looked back at me. A white, translucent hand gripped my neck. Startled, I turned my face away from the mirror. But then, my body froze. Everything went cold, and it was like all my energy was draining through my feet. I tried to scream for help, but no voice came out. I thought I'd finally gone crazy. The strange cries echoed in my head, over and over. Help me, Grandma. The paralysis gripping my body broke at the sound of my grandmother's voice, and the woman in the mirror disappeared. I sighed in relief, thinking I'd been saved, and quickly ran back down to the first floor. But that night, as I was about to fall asleep, again I was struck by paralysis, along with that voice. I started to regret going up to the second floor that day. But in contrast to my feelings, my body grew even more stiff and heavy. Then, my body started sinking into the bed, like somebody had climbed on top of me and was pushing down. I opened my eyes. I couldn't even scream. It wasn't because of the paralysis. It was because time stopped. That was how I felt, anyway. This terror continued until I passed out. It was the next morning by the time the paralysis passed, and I was able to move freely again. From that day onward, everything around me changed. I sprained my ankle during volleyball practice, and I kept crashing my bike, injuring myself. I don't know why, but only during those times, it felt like all the power was leaving my body. Then a mysterious pain in my left shoulder kept me from getting out of bed. We quickly went to see a doctor, but they couldn't find anything wrong with the bones or muscle. My friends and teammates wondered if perhaps it wasn't the work of a spirit. I could do nothing but keep visiting the hospital. Then, several days passed. I was unable to move my left shoulder at all. Then, just as we got back from the doctor, my aunt passed out. She'd been struck down with something, and my grandmother said that if she didn't get cleansed the next day, something bad would happen. My aunt was cleansed the next day by a spirit medium and quickly got better. At the same time, my left shoulder was almost unbelievably able to move again. Because when the medium was done cleansing my aunt, he cleansed me as well. I listened to them talk and then told them everything that had happened. But they had no idea who that woman might have been. After that, I no longer suffered from paralysis or random injuries and lived my life healthily. Ever since then, I don't worry about the second floor much either. Now, my aunt and grandmother use the first floor, while I use the second. I don't find it scary anymore. But still, even now, I'm unable to remove the cloth covering that mirror again. That woman might still be there. Since long ago, mirrors and glass were treated as mysterious items that harbor spiritual power. This spiritual power manifests as a strange phenomenon, acting as a door between our world and the next. Yamada, a regular 26-year-old businessman, lived an extremely normal life. But there was just one thing that he would never do. He would never stand in front of the mirror late at night. There was a reason for this. It happened during his summer club camp during his second year of high school. Yamada went to the toilet late one night and while washing his hands, looked up at the mirror. When he did, he saw a black figure pass by behind him. But when he turned around, nobody was there. How strange, he thought. And when he turned back to the mirror, he saw his own mouth grinning back at him. Eh? Yamada thought he must just be tired, so he washed his face and checked the mirror again, several times over. It seemed that he was just seeing things that weren't really there. It was just the water drops he'd flicked on the mirror while washing his hands. Yamada reached out to wipe the water away. Uah! His face completely disappeared from the mirror. The only thing reflected in it was a pitch-black hand. The very next moment, that strange hand grabbed him tightly. Then it started pulling him towards the mirror. Stop it! He tried his best to shake it off, and when he finally did, he ran. Then, he saw something even more terrifying than the black hand float into view. But whatever it was that he saw, Yamada would never say. But he still speaks of the black bruise that hand left on his arm. Report. It said there are lots of famous suicide spots all around us, and this is one of those. The pedestrian crossing near Omiya Station is called the Ikoi crossing. In reality, this regular crossing has claimed many lives. The high school student Sugita-kun experienced something terrifying here on his way home from his friend's house in Omiya. It was well past 2 a.m. So Sugita-kun decided to pass through the Ikoi crossing to get home quicker. Why is there a woman here so late? A woman with long hair and a white dress stood on the other side of the crossing. The woman, who had been looking at the ground, seemed to notice Sugita-kun and suddenly looked up. Red lips, like an open gash, grinned at him from her pale face. Then she beckoned for him to come closer. For some reason, he felt himself losing consciousness. "Look out!" A voice brought him back to, and he realized he was standing between the closed barriers of the crossing. Panicking, he jumped out. Seconds later, an out-of-service train passed right before Sugita-kun's eyes. It was an old man who just happened to be passing by that called out to him. He could no longer see the woman. It was as though she had disappeared in a puff of smoke. The woman had probably killed herself at that crossing. Spirits who remain in this world filled with regret are probably so lonely that they try to beckon others to join them. Access. On foot, 5 minutes from Omiya Station. Point. Fear level, 3 flames. Mood, 3 flames. Sightings, 3 flames. Chance of being cursed, 4 flames. Total, 3 flames. If you happen to see a woman in a white dress standing by this crossing at night, do not look at her. The first time I heard the footsteps was during the summer I turned 13. I always heard them coming from the living room. The dim living room with little sunlight. One humid summer night, the footsteps in the living room woke me up. It seemed like somebody was walking around in there. I thought perhaps somebody was looking for something, but it seemed it wasn't that at all. Someone was coming and going from the room. Maybe it's a thief, I thought, but the footsteps didn't sound like that either. I pressed my ears in the direction of the living room and listened closer. Then the footsteps suddenly stopped and the room fell quiet, like time had stopped. I looked at the clock and it was exactly 1:15 a.m. Did the fact that the footsteps stopped mean that the person was now standing still in the living room instead? Or did they go outside instead? Either option was strange. There was no way to get outside just from the living room. Did the person just disappear? I grew scared while thinking about what might have happened, and I couldn't sleep for the rest of the night. I felt like I might hear those faint footsteps again. The next morning, I asked my family about what happened the night before, but nobody knew anything about it. It seemed everyone was asleep then. Then, that night, I heard the footsteps again. I jumped out of bed and slowly looked into the living room. The footsteps had started at 1 a.m. They wandered around the living room for roughly 15 minutes and then disappeared at the same time as the night before. Who on earth was it? After that, the footsteps always appeared at the same time, and then disappeared at the same time. Every summer, for 3 years. But then, 5 years ago, the footsteps stopped. The last time I heard them, I was 16, and I didn't think I'd ever hear them again. But when I was 21, I heard the footsteps again. They startled me. But oddly, I wasn't afraid. Perhaps that was because I'd already spent 3 years listening to them. It was like I'd grown immune to them. I paid no attention to the footsteps and ignored them. But it seemed the owner of the footsteps saw through my intentions. When I thought they had stopped, they started approaching my room instead. Then the sliding door opened slightly, and something stared at me from the next room. The realization that the situation had changed shook me. Tension hung in the air, and as though responding to it, my entire body broke out in a sweat. But then my fear, strangely, turned into curiosity. I wanted to see who the owner of those footsteps was. I don't know why, but my feet seemed to carry me towards the sliding door of their own accord. Nobody was there. There wasn't even any sign of footsteps, let alone someone's presence. I just stood there in the silent room, scared half to death. I later spoke to a priest about what happened, and I discovered that the footsteps belonged to the spirit of one of my ancestors. Apparently, they wanted us to build a new grave for them. Upon hearing that, our family set out to clean the grave at once and said a prayer in their honor. We were in no position to be buying a new grave, after all. This is a story I heard a few years ago from Yamada, the chairman of the Radio Lovers Club. It's about a strange event that took place at his house. Yamada-san moved into his current house several years ago. It's located in a new residential area surrounded by mountains and forest, and he lives there with his wife. 1 week after moving in, something strange suddenly happened in their otherwise normal house. The first person to notice it was his wife. One morning, his wife entered the altar room to change the offerings by the altar when she was treated to a strange sight. The 6 tatami mats on the floor had been stabbed with something like a stick numerous times. They seemed to spread out from the altar. His wife quickly ran into the room to check what was going on. Thankfully, only the tatami had been harmed, and the altar and other items were untouched. She quickly called her husband over to see, and they wondered what could have happened. But they couldn't think of a reason why. In the end, they couldn't figure anything out, They changed the tatami mats and decided to keep an eye on the room. Then, 3 days later, when they checked the altar room, the tatami was again full of countless holes. The husband and wife were thoroughly creeped out. They spoke to a friend about it, who said they would introduce them to a spirit medium. Three days later, as soon as the spirit medium arrived, he went to visit the room in question. The altar room was in an indescribably strange state compared to 3 days earlier, and this abnormalness had spread all over the house. Here, right? Yes? Perhaps sensitive to it, the medium walked through the house without being told where to go. Then he stopped in front of the altar room. He slowly slid the sliding doors open and stepped inside. Yamada-san and his wife followed him. The tatami that had been changed over, especially for that day, smelled even worse than usual. It was like a dead body was buried beneath them. The three of them sat down facing the altar. When Yamada-san and his wife were done telling him everything, the medium nodded and started talking. I see. There's a spirit right here. Eh? A spirit? Yes. I'll perform an exorcism now. Listen carefully to the spirit's words as they come out of my mouth now. Okay. They are the truth of the figure bringing misfortune down upon your house. Then the medium started chanting a strange chant. Then he quietly closed his eyes. The medium suddenly started speaking in a low, husky voice. His eyes pierced right through them, and he was like an entirely different person to the one who had entered their house. Yamada-san shrank back and asked the spirit a question. Why do you only appear in this house? Having said that, the medium glared frightfully at Yamada-san and his wife. They both trembled at his countenance. But Yamada-san, hiding his fear, continued asking questions. What can we do for you to forgive us? Having said that, the wickedness disappeared from the medium, and the heavy atmosphere became unbelievably light. The medium, thoroughly worn out, fell limp. Yamada-san and his wife were worried, but they wanted to know what was happening, so they looked into the medium's face. When he realized what they wanted, the medium informed them that it was over. And so, Yamada-san's house was saved. But for an entire year, his wife never left the house, and Yamada-san had to carry out all of the shopping and such by himself. Then, the spirit kept their promise. Now they live peacefully, with no problems. After that, I discovered an unexpected truth. I learnt it from a friend who lived in the same city that I told of this story. Apparently, the new house Yamada-san was living in was formerly a graveyard that the owner sold off to pay some debt. So there are places like that, huh? I think I was around 17 at the time. When I was asleep at night, something strange would happen. A few minutes after I got into bed, suddenly I could hear chanting. I could hear it right by my ear. At first I thought I was imagining it, but there was no altar in our house, nor anyone who chanted. While I thought it was strange, the sounds slowly got smaller. My relief was short-lived, because next I heard the sound of a bell. At that moment, I was overcome by paralysis. I desperately tried to scream to wake up my younger brother, but no sound came out. I tried to move, but only broke out in a cold sweat. My brother slept soundly beside me. Shin-chan, wake up! I screamed inside, but the more I screamed, the more afraid I got. I probably called that fear upon myself. I calmed down a little upon seeing my brother's peaceful, sleeping face. If I calmed down, then the paralysis wouldn't seem so scary either. I observed the room carefully. Then, I noticed what sounded like strange footsteps coming from somewhere inside the room. They didn't sound like human footsteps. I tried to move again. It seemed like the paralysis was beginning to wear off, and I tried turning my head to the side. There were tiny white feet. I realized right away they weren't human. The feet were bare, but looked to be made of cloth. When I looked up, I saw exactly what I expected to see. A doll wearing a hat. It was the doll my grandmother gave me for my birthday last year. It always sat on my shelf. The small shelf in the corner of my room. The doll's mouth, which shouldn't have been able to open, moved and spoke. Then it glared at me, smiling. Only its eyes seemed angry. I didn't know what it was saying, but I honestly shook my head no. Then the doll nodded slightly and disappeared to the other side of the door. I thought I was dreaming, so the fear I felt dissipated. If I didn't think that, I wouldn't have been able to get back to sleep again. The next morning, I checked the bookshelf. As I suspected, the doll was nowhere to be seen. I was so scared that I couldn't say anything about it to anyone. As a result, I started to think that the doll might suddenly appear somewhere again. For several days, I was unable to sleep until I found it. A week later, I discovered that the doll was at my dead grandmother's house. According to my grandfather, the doll suddenly appeared in my grandmother's dream. "I went to see Megumi and we spoke," it said. He said the next day he looked at the altar and saw the doll sitting next to it, surprising him. After I heard that, I went to my grandmother's house and offered her new rice and water. "Grandma, I'm sorry." They call hearing sounds when nobody is around, such as the sound of breaking glass, rap phenomena. It is the first stage of psychic phenomena. This story is about what kicked off that rap phenomena. Matsuzawa moved into that apartment around 7 months after her eldest son was born. One day, she was cleaning the house as usual. As she was vacuuming, she heard a bang by her feet. She looked down and... Kata! Kata kata kata! Even though nobody was touching it, a toy robot was moving. There was nobody in the room other than her. She didn't once think it might be a psychic phenomenon. But perhaps that was just the start of it. After that, she was subjected to strange occurrence after strange occurrence. Of course, she suffered from sleep paralysis and rap phenomena. She sensed people when she was alone, and she saw a nurse in an army uniform walking around her house. Matsuzawa had a strong ability to sense the supernatural. One night, something moved soundlessly past her slightly open bedroom door. Wondering what it was, she stared and saw 2 figures enter her room. Seemed to be a parent and child. No doubt about it, they were ghosts. She froze and waited to see what would happen. The spirit that appeared to be the father looked down at her for a while before grinning strangely and disappearing. The spirit of the child had already gone. Then, it grew hard to breathe, and she looked up. A woman with unkempt hair, slanted eyes, and a mouth cut from ear to ear was strangling her with terrifying strength. "No!" Unable to breathe, her voice came out hoarse. And perhaps she was paralyzed again, because she couldn't move. She desperately said a Buddhist prayer, hoping to break free from this nightmare as soon as possible. As she was about to lose consciousness, the phenomenon finally disappeared. A few days later, she discovered from a neighbor that several years earlier, the area had been subjected to a large flood that claimed many lives. But had something else happened in that apartment aside from the flood? she couldn't help but wonder, and so she moved out. Perhaps even now. The high school I attended had a long Buddhist history. Please listen to one of the many ghost stories passed down at our school. This is a story that happened to the PE teacher, Mr. Fuji, about 34 years ago. On this day, Mr. Fuji was on day duty. The school had a history with Buddhism, and we often heard about the strange things that happened when teachers were on duty. And so, those who were on duty would always get the chills. Mr. Fuji was no different. But according to him, he wasn't easily scared by such scary stories. He would just laugh at the other teachers who were. That night, he took a nap after 7 and left to go on patrol around 11:30. He had to check each and every part of the silent school. With a torch in hand, Mr. Fuji walked down the dark hall. How stupid, he thought, making fun of the ghost stories he heard during the day to shake off his fear. Before he knew it, he found himself in front of the auditorium. He flung the door open and confirmed that nobody was inside. He muttered that the stories told during the day were just fakes meant to scare people. A car horn? He heard a car horn nearby. It was 12:02 a.m. Was somebody playing a joke? Mr. Fuji couldn't hide his agitation, because it was his car in the carport. Besides, he was the only person at school at the time. Thinking it a prank, he rushed over to the garage. He looked inside once he got there. The only thing there was his brand new second-hand car. There was no sign of anyone else, and the car was still locked. The next day, Mr. Fuji told his colleague, Mr. Mita, about what happened. He received an unexpected reply in response. Mr. Fuji's car was second-hand, but basically brand new. It was a new model from that very same year. Not only that, but he'd gotten it for a great price. Mr. Mita wondered the reason for that was maybe because it was haunted. Of course, Mr. Fuji got angry at him, and the conversation ended there. But it didn't end there. Other teachers on duty also heard the sound, and it always happened at 12:02 a.m. Rumors of it gradually spread throughout the teachers' room. A week after it first occurred, the vice principal called Mr. Fuji in and asked him to remove his car from the premises. It seemed obvious, but Mr. Fuji couldn't believe it. In order to clear his name, he decided to cover the night duty that very night. Mr. Meter, who was supposed to be on duty that day, agreed to stay with him. But the duty was just in name, and they spent the entire time waiting in front of the car. The time was 12:01. 1 minute and 56 seconds. 57 seconds. 58 seconds. 59 seconds. A white haze appeared around Mr. Fuji's car inside the garage, and it slowly rose higher into the air. After it disappeared into the darkness, only Mr. Fuji's car was there, like nothing had changed. After that, Mr. Fuji went back to where he'd bought the car and heard the story from start to finish. After asking the trader to explain, he finally began talking after a long silence. You see, it's terribly difficult to say this. That car was involved in an accident. I'm so sorry. I knew it. As for the car's previous owner, it was a 25-year-old man who had just gotten married and started a family. He was driving along the road late one night after getting his new car. He was driving rather fast and perhaps a little carelessly because there were no people around. As he drove through a pedestrian crossing, he accidentally hit someone. He had apparently taken his eyes off the road. On top of that, the car was driving so fast that it crashed into a nearby telephone pole. The pedestrian was crushed between the car and the pole and died instantly. The young man driving the car also slammed his head into the front window glass, killing him instantly. When he died with his head on the car horn. The sound of it continued on and on at the scene of the accident. It all happened right at 12:02 a.m. Needless to say, Mr. Fuji soon got rid of the car. Now, 34 years later, that car has no doubt been pulled apart. But that car that held on to the regretful last moments of its owner, what happened to those memories as it was pulled apart? Are they still screaming out in pain somewhere, even now? Or perhaps just thinking about it gives me a bad feeling. I think it happened when I was in the second grade of junior high. I was seeing the dentist at the time, and on this day I was on my bike on my way to the dentist after school. It was about 15 minutes on my bike from home to the dentist. If I took the forest path on the way, it was only 10 minutes. This is about what happened during those 10 minutes. Club had finished and I was on my way back late, so the sun was already setting. I was on my bike, heading home as usual. The air was oddly crisp, and it was a strange day. Normally, the wind would feel nice against me as I rode on my bike. But just for this day, it felt gross. I quickly wanted to get everything done, so I pedaled faster. Then, I saw the split in the road leading to the forest path and the road I always took. I stopped and looked at the forest path, debating if I should take the shortcut. As the evening wore on, the forest path was dimmer than usual, and although it was narrow, on this day it seemed even more narrow than usual. This path, something about it scares me. But once I was through it, it was nothing but bright residential streets all the way to the dentist. With that in mind, I turned my bike down the forest path and began riding. But no matter how long I rode, I couldn't see the residential area. For a moment, I thought I might be lost. That was how different the path felt. But I'd lived in that area my whole life. I knew it well, and I passed by it every day. There was no way I'd gotten lost. Anxious, I continued pedaling down the creepy, dark path with only small light to light the way. After pedaling for a short while, I saw something white in front of me. It seemed to be a person. A group of strange people wearing straw raincoats and holding umbrellas above their heads. I rode past the line of people, finding it strange. Thinking about it carefully, it was odd. Who wore straw raincoats with umbrellas in this day and age? Plus, they were kinda puffy and their bodies were white. I quickly stopped my bike and turned back. What? I had just passed them, but the line of people was far in the distance, slowly walking. If they were just a little further, I wouldn't have been able to see them. I grew frightened and pedaled as fast as I could away from the place. I'd never pedaled that hard before in my life. A short while later, I could see the lights from the residential area between the trees. Relieved, I started pedaling a little slower. I was dumbfounded. It was entirely different to the scenery I knew. It wasn't the bright residential area I knew, but dark, like it had all been abandoned. What I had seen before appeared to be streetlights. I got off my bike and walked down the quiet path, all by myself. It was 6:45 p.m. There was no reason for nobody else to be around. It was a residential area, not even 5 minutes from the station. For not a single other person to be out walking was... Where on earth had I found myself? I grew scared and got on my bike again. I was in such a rush that I lost balance and ran into a pole. I apparently hit the ground hard, and everything went dark. When I came back to, I was surrounded by 4 or 5 people. They were wearing old-fashioned clothes and what looked like hakama pants. They were discussing something as they looked down at me. I asked them for help. Suddenly, they grabbed me and lifted me up. I thought they were about to toss me into the air. They lifted me up so high. I tried to scream, but no voice came out. Stop it. My scream was in vain as they lifted me high, and then I dropped back to the ground as they let me go. The impact hurt so much that I passed out. But even now, I still remember how it felt like I was falling into a really deep hole. That was the only thing I felt as my consciousness faded away. When I came back to, I was lying in a hospital bed. My mother and a strange man were standing next to me. Mum? Are you okay? What on earth happened to you? I was on my way to the dentist. You suddenly fell in front of a taxi. Don't you remember? You scared me. You fell so suddenly in front of me that I didn't have time to hit the brakes. I'm so sorry. Finally, I came to understand the situation I was in. Apparently, I'd been hit by a car. Thankfully, there were no serious injuries, but... What was real? I didn't see any taxi, and I had no memory of being in an ambulance. I really did ride down that forest path into the residential area. But, thinking back on it, although what I saw and what really happened didn't really seem to match, I think they were still related. I'm not sure why, though. It was a small town, sandwiched between hills, with roughly 30 buildings, and in total, housed 60 families. A town so small that people had to go to the bus stop and head to the next town over to go shopping. April 28th. Yasuko was a regular housewife, living with her husband and 2 children. Recently, many strange things had been happening in the neighborhood, and just the other day, her acquaintance Sato had been involved in a train accident. Eh? He killed himself? Yeah, the moment the train entered the platform. There were people who saw him jump onto the tracks. Who said that? I don't know. I hope it's just a rumor. But Tazaki-san from down the bottom of the hill died just the other day. The housewives fell silent for a moment. Hey, come to think of it, the children haven't wanted to play outside recently, have they? Yeah, my kids are the same. Mine too. What on earth is going on? Things really have been strange recently. They chatted for a while before Yasuko left. But really, suicide. He showed no signs of it when we saw each other a few days ago. He even said his family was going to the amusement park next week. As she walked and pondered what was going on, Yasuko could feel eyes looking at her. But there was nobody else around. The more she noticed it, the more it bothered her, and although she could feel someone looking at her, she told herself that no one was there. Then she felt several people looking at her, and she quickly turned around. But nobody was there. See? Nobody's there. What's going on? But even so, something had caught her attention. She didn't think it was her imagination. The more she thought about it, the more worried she became, and she unconsciously picked up the pace, her heart beating faster. Then, being followed by something she couldn't see, she returned home. June 17th. They're having a funeral at Yamada-san's house next, apparently. Did you hear something? Was it a suicide again? Seems like it, but nobody knows why. Counting from the start of spring, 10 people from down the hill had killed themselves. It's a little strange, but apparently none of them left suicide notes either. That is strange, huh? Yasuko felt like the strange situation taking place in the town and the eyes she felt looking at her recently were somehow connected. She wondered whether she should tell her husband about it, but she didn't feel like she could yet. She thought her pragmatic husband would just laugh at her. July 2nd. Yasuko's 3-year-old son returned home dejected. After coming home from daycare, he ran out to play, but something seemed wrong with him. Welcome back. What's wrong, sweetie? People were saying that the people uphill would be next to die. What? Who said such a thing? I don't know. Everyone. So the stories had finally reached the children too. Yasuko's mood dropped, and she couldn't say anything to her children. When her husband returned home that evening, Yasuko had forgotten about what happened. Apparently, Suzuki-san from across the road's been hospitalized. It can't be for an attempted suicide, though. They said he's gone mad. It's not that hard to believe after all the deaths that have taken place here. That would wear anyone down. The funeral home is so busy now that they're probably happy about it, though. Hey, don't say that. Sorry. We've lived here for 6 years with nothing of note. So why? It's gotta be a curse. Probably. I don't really believe in ghosts or curses or such things, though. This is all too strange. There has to be some reason for why nothing makes sense. You mean the town is haunted? Maybe. Yasuko's worries grew at her realist husband's words. A haunted town? That night, Yasuko couldn't sleep. July 6th. After the children spoke of the terrifying rumors, nothing especially happened. The town, with person after person going mad, fell into a lulled state. But Yasuko, unable to sleep, fell ill, and things grew worse by the day. The night was hot, and Yasuko couldn't sleep. Then she heard a sharp sound from somewhere. At the same time, her entire body froze. "I'm scared. Help me. I can't move." Her body suddenly floated up into the air, and when she looked down, she could clearly see herself. She floated outside, and when she stopped for a moment on the roof, she seemed to suddenly get drawn up into the sky. Before long, her body stopped in mid-air. Beneath her, she could see the town she lived in. Is that a temple outside town? At that point, she woke up. Was it all a dream? July 7, 8:30 a.m. When Yasuko's husband saw her face, his look turned sour. "What's wrong? You don't look well." "I'm fine. It's nothing. Can you come home early today?" "Actually, When she tried to tell him about the night before, he cut her off. "I have something I need to look into, but I'll try and come home early." Nothing's happened for a while, so maybe it's all over now. You shouldn't worry about it too much. Yeah. How good would it be if that were true, Yasuko thought. But in contrast to her husband's words, Yasuko felt things were even worse than before, so she couldn't agree with him. "3:16 p.m. Mentally tired, Yasuko took an afternoon nap. Her dream began at the top of the stairs, looking down at the front door. She could see someone turning the handle of the front door. After it opened, a small child's face popped through and entered the house. Wearing a white kimono, he looked like a child from long ago, with his hair tied up, and his face was pure white. Then he turned to look at Yasuko and grinned. "What? A child? Stay away! I can't move!" As they collided, Yasuko woke up. Only the child hadn't collided with her, but rather gone right through her. It felt so horrifying, a strangeness that trembled through her muscles, that even now she still felt it. With that, Yasuko's afternoon nap and nightmare ended. That dream brought with it a terrible meaning. July 8, 8:53 a.m. Because they still weren't up, Yasuko went up to her children's room to wake them. "Hey, sleepyheads, get up!" "Mama, it was scary." "What happened, dear? Why are you crying so much?" "There was a monster. The door opened, and a child with a white face looked in." That child wasn't a dream? Was the reason that numerous people had died was because they had seen that child? Yasuko thought so, but she smiled at her children like always. "Well, let's tell your father about it when he gets home." "Will he kill the monster for us?" "Yes, he's very strong." That night, Yasuko told her husband everything that had happened until that point. Her nightmares, the strange child their children had seen, everything. July 8, 9:32 p.m. It's all true, although you might not believe it. No, seems I have no choice but to believe you. I went to the local museum today and learnt something strange about this town's history. Her husband placed the thick bundle of copied papers he was holding on the table and began talking. During the Sengoku period, 5 wandering samurai secretly approached this area. Their target was the enemy of their lord, killed at a young age. But their perfectly laid out plan was foiled when one of the men betrayed the others, and all 5, including the betrayer, had their heads cut off. After that, the farmers, who had helped capture the wandering samurai, found themselves beset by misfortune after misfortune. One day, a virtuous monk came to the village that had seen terrible things and built a temple on the outskirts, and down the hill, he erected a stone monument dedicated to the 5 fallen spirits. Nobody knows the story these days, so do you know what happened to that memorial stone? You mean the dump? The location of the new garbage disposal area had once held a stone monument. The words "temple outside the village" caught Yasuko's attention. She'd seen it in her dream. That child had to have been the spirit of the young murdered lord. The children had stopped playing outside at the exact same time as the new dump had been built. That's why these things have been happening. Something must have happened to the people who committed suicide as well. And what should we do? It may already be too late for us to do anything. July 11th. Yasuko's husband brought home a female spirit medium from somewhere. Here, I definitely feel a strong power here. A stone sign that looked like a memorial stone stood at the edge of the dump. Yasuko and her husband cleaned all around it. Papa, do you think it'll work? It has to. Come on, give me a hand. When they were done cleaning, the woman began to focus. Well then, let's begin. Kanji zai bosa gyoshin hanya hara mitaji kufu ishiki shiki sokuzeku kusoku zeshiki. Yeah. What's wrong? Did you see something? Suddenly, a strong wind blew and tossed up all sorts of rubbish and dried leaves. Yasuko felt time and space warp. Then, headless armored warriors and a creepy child in white clothing emerged out of the dirt and floated towards her. The child smiled as he saw Yasuko. The headless soldiers screamed into space. Yeah! The medium passed out and hit the ground, perhaps unconscious. Are you okay? The moment the medium passed out, the headless samurai and child disappeared, and the wind that had been blowing suddenly stopped. The medium soon regained consciousness. "What's wrong?" "I'm exhausted. I'll be going home now." What on earth had happened? The medium said nothing and hurried away from the place. Yasuko and her husband could only watch the woman go, dumbfounded. July 11th, 11:30 a.m. When they got home, the husband and wife sat down in silence. Yasuko resolved herself. If things continued like this, they'd never recover from it. "You want to move?" "Yes, we can't live in this town any longer." Hey, hang on. What are we going to do after that? And what's going to happen if we stay here? If that child and the samurai just happen to come back, are you okay with that? Don't worry, I'll answer it. Hello? Thank you for today. Yes. No, thank you. Is that so? I see. Goodbye. What's wrong? Let's move. It's like you said. It seems the medium that came out today has given up as well. She said if we don't move soon, something terrible will happen. So, yeah, let's get out of here as soon as possible. Don't worry, it'll be fine. After that, Yasuko and her family moved into the city. As for what happened to the town after that, nobody knows. If, perhaps, there are children in your town who don't play outside, then perhaps you should be careful. Don't forget about the dump either. Report. The philosopher Inoue Enryo, who founded Toyo University, opened this park as a dojo to train one's mind. It's called Tetsugaku-do Park. There are several suspicious buildings there, such as the Yokai Gate, the Onigami Cave, and the Skull Retreat. Plus, you can walk around the park's gardens with features such as GQ Hill, Yubutsu Park, and Yuishin Garden, all designed to make you think about philosophy as you do so. There's also a plum tree in the park known as the Ghost Plum Tree. Just like its name states, it's said that if you take a photo of the tree, you'll capture a ghost. Kashiwara-kun, who lived nearby, was curious and took a photo of the tree. When he developed the photo, he saw countless shadows that looked like human faces all around the tree. Then, that night, he fell victim to a mysterious fever and passed out. The fever continued for several days and showed no signs of letting up. But one of his worried friends suggested he pour water and salt over the photo, and so he did. Unbelievably, his fever dropped. According to later stories, some people who took ghost photos there even lost their lives. Even now, thinking about what might have happened to Kashiwara-kun if he had done nothing sends chills down one's spine. You shouldn't take ghost photos for fun or because you're curious. Access. By car, head towards Nerima on Yamanote Dori, Ni Chome, Naka-Ochiai, then turn left at the 6th set of traffic lights on Nishi-Ochiai, Ichome. On foot, take the bus to Tetsugaku-do Park from JR Ikebukuro Station. Point. Fear level, 2 flames. Mood, 4 flames. Sightings, 2 flames. Chance of being cursed, 1 flame. Total, 2 flames. If you just want to go for a walk, then Tetsugaku-do Park is a wonderful place. The story I'm going to tell you now is a true story I heard from my mother, who worked in design. After hearing it, I grew extremely worried about my future. If you listen until the end, you'll understand why. First, please listen to my story. It all started when my mother's close friend visited her workplace. My mother rented an apartment a short distance from home to use as her workplace. When her friend arrived, it was around lunchtime. She handed her a single photo and, trembling, started to explain her business. That photo, it turned out, was haunted. As for why she took it to my mother, ever since she was young, my mother was able to see things. She possessed a third eye that normal people didn't have. I never saw it myself, but my mother had seen all sorts of supernatural events over the years. She knew a lot about how to deal with ghosts. The photo her friend had brought her was because of that as well. First, my mother would decide how to proceed after seeing the photo in question. It was a photo taken at the sea with rocks in the background. Looking closely, you could see faces floating in the background, staring at the rocks. My mother asked for details about the situation and atmosphere at the time. But her friend didn't seem to want to talk about the photo and chose her words carefully. Then she pushed the photo across to my mother and quickly left. There was nothing else she could do, so she took it and then returned to her work. She was busy with work that day, so even by 8 that night, she still hadn't returned home. In the end, she didn't come home that night. Apparently, she worked until 1 a.m. that night. She really had intended to come home though. Even though she was busy with work, the photo she received at lunchtime intrigued her. So she decided to spend the night at her workplace. But, contrary to her conduct, her work didn't proceed very well, and she started to feel ill. She thought that the reason for it was likely that ghost photo. She finally abandoned her work and got into bed after 2 a.m. But she struggled to get to sleep. On the contrary, she couldn't even close her eyes. That was because she had been assaulted by strong spiritual energy all day, starting from lunchtime. She got up and sighed. She could sense a strong spiritual energy around the desk. It was a close call. A compass went flying towards her, but she was able to get out of the way. It's here, she thought. At the same time, she was convinced that the spiritual energy was indeed rather strong, because at that very moment, she could no longer move. If the spiritual energy hadn't been strong, then she wouldn't have been unable to move. But she knew a way to break it. Even so, this was the only time that she was unable to do anything about it. She couldn't even prop herself up against the wall. When she looked forward, she noticed all the sharp objects in the room were floating. They were all aimed at her. But that was just a warning of what was to come. She could already sense a terribly strong presence on the other side of the door. The door quietly opened and a kitchen knife floated into the room. That's what a regular person would have seen anyway. But my mother clearly saw the evil spirit. Its hand held the knife and approached my mother. Unable to do anything, she felt like she was about to die. Then she closed her eyes, as though giving up. My guardian spirit? Those words? Suddenly, the words sprang to life in the back of her mind. She didn't know much about them, but at any rate, she chanted the incantation to dispel evil spirits. I'm safe? The strong spiritual energy that had filled the room disappeared. The knife and other sharp objects fell to the ground. She fell on the bed, confused about the terrifying event that had just taken place. Of course, she wasn't able to sleep for the rest of that night. The incantation to dispel evil spirits was something the gold guardian spirit she had seen had once taught her, she said. I don't know the full details either, but at any rate, it saved her. The next day, my mother called her friend and gave the photo back. Apparently, she couldn't get rid of the spirits attached to the photo. It had taken all she had just to seal them momentarily. All she could do was visit a powerful spirit medium or monk to deal with the photo. My mother introduced her to a monk she knew, explaining the situation to him before handing it over. Thus, my mother was able to safely return home, and then she told me everything. When she got home, the first thing she did was smile at me. It was an exhausted smile. I still remember the image of my mother standing in the door that day, even now. I think that smile was because of my mother's kindness and wanting to reassure us that everything was okay. I think in that smile, I saw a strong, kind woman. But recently, I think about it a lot. Will I, who shares her blood, end up becoming like my mother? Or... I'm very worried. Lastly, my mother unfortunately never taught me the incantation she used. If regular people used it carelessly, then something terrible might happen, apparently. I don't know any more than that. But please, don't think it's something strange. Thank you very much. It was late into autumn. The school festival had ended, and I was suffering from a broken heart as well. Looking back on it now, it was a pretty unstable time for me. The train I always took home from school was somewhat busy and shook from side to side. Club activities at school were particularly rough that day, so I was kinda tired. But it wasn't really my body that was tired, but my mind. I got into bed and closed my eyes, reliving the happy days I'd shared with my boyfriend. Of course, I struggled to fall asleep, and I lay in bed, waiting to get tired. I looked at the dim orange light and emptied my head. Finally, I grew drowsy, and my consciousness faded away. Somewhere, I could hear a voice. It didn't sound like my younger sister, who was sleeping next to me. Listening closer, it sounded like 10 or so people talking. I was finally tired, so I ignored them and tried to sleep. But then... I felt a strange weight on top of the bed. It was like someone was pushing down on my shoulders. It slowly got stronger, like it was pushing me down further into the bed. My breathing became more labored, and just when I thought it was about to stop, suddenly, the power holding me down let go. Half awake, I saw myself in the middle of the room. Then my consciousness transported to me, and I saw in front of me. I turned to look at the window in the west side of my room. I saw a black figure swaying on the other side of it. It looked human. On top of that, I could see what looked like the shadow of a lion ripped straight from a comic book, standing by the door. Perhaps I wasn't in the best mental state. I remember thinking the lion looked oddly cute. I reached out to touch it as it looked at me and called it closer. Then, the lion suddenly rushed at me with incredible speed. I was sent flying and landed on the other side of the bed. It felt like I'd fallen into a strange space. At any rate, I kept falling. On and on. I called out the name of my sister sleeping next to me as I fell. As I looked around, the room was silent once more, like nothing had happened. Was it all just a dream? Even as I was worried, my chest heaved in relief. But I couldn't get what had just happened out of my head. I reached out and grabbed my sister's hand, placing it to my cheek. At that moment, nothing could calm me more than the warmth of another human. I tightly gripped her hand. As I calmed down, I put her hand back under the blanket. As I did, I realized I was still in that same world from before. And if so, that hand was nothing but a hand. I threw it to the floor. That was all I could do. To escape from that place, it was all I could. That hand, it grabbed onto the blankets from the floor and climbed up. One step, and then another. Apparently I passed out, and when I woke up, it was morning. Seemed I'd made quite a fuss in my sleep, and my worried mother spoke to me at breakfast time. Was it a dream? Or was it reality? I really couldn't tell. I researched various things after that, but it all ended up the same. Looking back, it was a terrifying experience. But nothing happened after that. And it's not like anything unlucky happened to me after that either. If I had to say, I've lived a happy life since then. Maybe it was just a product of my mind. I'm still not sure. The music room. When it comes to scary stories there, most of them are about piano sounds. At an elementary school in Gunma Prefecture, they say you can hear the sound of a piano coming from an empty music room. When you look inside, there are bloody hands cut off at the wrist hitting the keys. And at a junior high in Iwate Prefecture, blood drips from the ceiling onto the piano keys, playing what sounds like the school anthem. And during class, when the teacher makes a mistake while playing the piano, the portrait of Beethoven glares at them. There are all sorts of stories about the portraits. There are all sorts of stories all over Japan, just like this. It would seem that there's a story just like that at this school too. Let's take a look. I can no longer hear the sound of the piano that was playing just a moment ago. What I can hear is just the sound of a metronome. How odd. What would you do in this situation? Look at the portraits. It must have been a Bach song playing, so Beethoven is angry. The spirits of the musicians are hidden in the portraits, so they're probably judging the music and songs they hear from those in the piano room. It's probably no exception, even if it's a spirit that's playing the piano. Misato, Natsumi, and Manami were 3 friends who had been close since junior high school. This is a story that happened to them while they were in junior high. It all began when something strange happened to Misato. One night, Misato was dozing in bed when she heard a small voice coming from somewhere. "Ahaha, ihihi, ha 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 ha." It was a laugh that sounded like it was reverberating from the depths of hell, and gradually it started to surround her. "No, stop it!" Scared, Misato tried to jump out of bed, but she couldn't move. She was paralyzed. She could hear her parents talking in the next room. All she could do was open and close her mouth. No voice came out. At school the next day, Misato told Natsumi what happened. Natsumi listened, amused, and didn't find it that scary, as though it wasn't her problem. When club practice was over and they were on their way home, Natsumi had completely forgotten Misato's story. Tired, Natsumi quickly fell asleep that night. "Ahaha, ihihi, ha ha ha." A creepy laugh woke Natsumi up. This is just like the story Misato told me, which means... Natsumi tried to move, but as expected, she couldn't, and when she realized, fear took over. The laughter increased in sound and volume, surrounding Natsumi entirely. "Come on, move!" Natsumi prayed over and over, and suddenly the paralysis broke, and the laughter disappeared as though it had never been there. Natsumi didn't get another wink of sleep that night. The exact same thing happened to me as it did to you. At school the next day, Natsumi told Misato and Manami what happened. Misato smiled bitterly. "Because I told you? No way! Did it pass on to you?" "So then, Manami's next." "Stop it! That's not funny." The 3 of them joked, but none of them really thought that Manami would suffer the same fate that night. The next day, Manami was pale. "It happened to me too. Exactly the same as you two." Misato and Natsumi unconsciously looked at each other. "So, it really is passing on then." "Let's end it with Manami." "Yeah, Manami, you mustn't tell anyone." "Yeah, okay. I won't say a word." Nothing happened to the girls after that. But to you, listening to this story, you should be careful.